Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursdays Live with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. My name is Ariana Gonzalez, and I'm the Client Services Manager here at Chug Attorneys and CPAs. Please join me in welcoming partner and attorney Mashida Jetty from our New York office. Hi there, Mashida, and welcome.
Hi, Ariana. Great to be with you.
Thank you for being here. So for today's topic, we're going to be talking all about international travel considerations for F-1 students. I'd like to remind you all that we are live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and this conversation is for informational purposes only, and it does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have questions on this topic, please comment them below or email us at info@chug.com, and we'll be happy to help you out. So, Mashida, to start off, can you give us an overview of what conditions F-1 students should keep in mind when traveling internationally? I know COVID-19 has been over for quite some time, but are there any restrictions left that we still need to consider?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Ariana. So, for F1 students, particularly those who may have either their OPT applications pending or when they have their H-1B petitions pending, for those who may have got picked up in the H-1B registration this year, they have to be a little careful while traveling abroad, because sometimes traveling abroad can have an impact on their pending applications. So if they have an OPT application pending, I would recommend that they wait until they get their EAD cards in hand, because if and when they want to return back to the country, the CBP might want to take a look at their approved application, the approved EAD card. So in addition to their I-20, which should be travel endorsed, in addition to having a valid F-1 visa, they should probably also wait for the OPT EAD application to get approved and then think of traveling abroad. Yeah.
That's great information. So they should wait for their OPT application to be approved. Thank you for that information, Mashida. So a lot of students right now who are graduating in summer, they may have applied for their F-1 OPT. So how does international travel impact these F-1 students while their F-1 OPT application remains pending?
Exactly. So as we just discussed, what happens is that the F-1 applications, they may take some time to get adjudicated. And during that time, if the foreign national or the student travels abroad and if the application is not approved, when they are returning back, the CBP might ask them if they have a valid work authorization, who are they going to be working for, where they're going to join. So if they don't have the OPT EAD card with them, then what they could also do is get an employment verification letter from the employer that they're going to join and have it written down that they expect to join work at a certain period of time after their OPT is approved. The other consideration also is that while they are on OPT, they cannot accrue more than 90 days of unemployment. So if they're stuck abroad and if they're unable to return for any reason, then that will start counting towards their it might start counting towards their unemployment, and maybe then they won't be able to resume their work. That's why these are the things that they should always consider before traveling abroad. Maybe definitely speak to an immigration attorney, and reach out to your employer and keep everyone well aware, including your DSO, if you have travel plans while all of these applications are pending.
Great, that's important information. So make sure you are talking to your immigration attorney if you are planning on traveling during this process. So for students who do have an approved OPT EAD card, can they still travel internationally while their H-1B cap petition is being filed or remains pending? Is there anything that these students need to consider before they make their travel plans?
Right, that's a great question. So, once the OPT-AD card is approved, obviously that's a great relief, and they have their work authorization for that time duration. But some of them might also be fortunate and may have their H-1B registration picked up this past summer. So, if their H-1B petition is being filed and it remains pending, one thing to note is that if it is filed as a change of status, and if they travel abroad while the petition is pending, then the automatic change of status will not happen. And that may sometimes become a problem if they are expecting to continue working on 1st of October on H-1B status. So if that happens, then there may be some other steps that the employer may have to take, or the students may have to take. They might have to go abroad and then return back using the H-1B visa stamp. They may have to apply for the stamping. So which is why if they're traveling while the H-1B petition is pending, they should definitely speak to their employer before making that trip, so that if maybe there can be some things that the employer can done. One of the options could be they could probably upgrade the petition to premium processing, so that the petition is approved in a shorter duration. And when the students travel, by then perhaps the H-1B petition would have been approved already, because the restriction primarily is to travel abroad while the petition remains pending, if it is being filed as a change of status. The alternative could be that if there's some immediate urgent need to travel, and if the students just absolutely cannot wait, then maybe they should discuss beforehand with the employer to file the H-1B as consular processing notification. And we can talk about that separately again. But that essentially means that they will not automatically change status on 1st of October, but they would have to take further steps. So either the employer would have to file another change of status petition after 1st of October, or the students can travel abroad, get their H-1B visa stamp, and return.
So it sounds like there are quite a few options that these F-1 students can take with their employers to ensure this process goes smoothly. So I appreciate you covering all of those different things.
Yeah, there are definitely options. Like I said, the most important thing is to keep, the employer and then immigration attorney, if they are working with one, and also their DSO, always apprised of any travel, particularly any international travel that they may want to do. Because sometimes, they might think, oh, I'm just going to go for a quick weekend to Canada and come back. I'll just go to Mexico and come back, or, just take a quick vacation and come back. But remember that anytime you're crossing international borders, that is an international travel, even if someone says, oh, I'm just going to the British Virgin Islands and coming back. So always speak to your employer before you want to travel abroad.
That's great information, Mishita. It is essential to make sure you are planning correctly if you are going to go through this and go through with your international travel plans. Even if it's just, like you said, for a quick weekend, we have to make sure we're doing this correctly to ensure, there's nothing that's going to affect your F-1 process. So let's talk about students who have applied for their F-1 STEM extension. So can these students who have applied for this extension travel abroad while their extension is pending and their OPT EAD card has expired?
Yes, so with STEM extensions, we definitely want to make sure that the students apply for the STEM extensions timely, which means that you should have an endorsed I-20 with an e-verified employer, and you have filed your F-1 STEM extension. Sometimes what happens is that, again, life happens and people want to travel. In those cases, we definitely recommend that you should carry the I-20, which has the STEM endorsement with it, and you should carry the expired STEM, the expired OPT card. You should also carry a copy of the receipt notice, which shows that your F-1 STEM extension is pending. Again, carry an employment verification letter, which confirms that you have a job to return to. You also have to make sure that there's a particular number of days that you can sort of be away, and if you're outside the country for more than those days, then your CVIS profile, which is your profile with the university, that should continue to remain open even while you're traveling abroad. So once again, I will repeat the same thing: let your DSO know, let your employer know. And in the cases for F-1 STEM extension students who also have their H-1B change of status petition pending, it's the same recommendation. Remember to speak to everyone, because if you have filed this as a change of status, remember that the moment you step abroad, the automatic change of status may not happen. And when you come back, then your employer may have to take further steps to reinstate you back on H-1B status past October 1, or you may have to step abroad again after 10/1 and get your H-1B visa stamp and return. There are obviously, with those who have OPT EAD cards or STEM EAD cards, there is a little bit more time because their work authorization is not immediately expiring. But I think those who are on CAP, that is the population of F1 students who should be most careful while traveling abroad, because their work authorization, which is given, is only on the basis of a H-1B petition being filed as change of status, and their work authorization is extended only until the 30th of September. So those who are on CAP, and then if they have to travel abroad, I would really recommend that if they can postpone that international travel, that would be really best. But if not, speak to your employer and let them know that past 9:30, they may not have work authorization, or in some cases, their work authorization may be cut even shorter because the change of status would mean that their work authorization will end on the day that their EAD card ends.
That's so helpful to know. So if students are planning on traveling with their OPT EAD card expired and their F1 STEM extension, they just have to make sure they have the necessary documents. And then I appreciate you covering that about the H-1B cap as well. If that's pending, make sure that they're speaking to their employer about that, because it's very important. So let's talk about the risks that F1 students might face when they're traveling internationally while their H-1B cap petition is being filed or remains pending. What are some potential challenges or issues that these students might encounter?
Right. So some of the risks, like we discussed, could be that if you have a change of status petition pending, the status may not get changed automatically on 1st of October if the petition is still pending and it's not approved. Some of the other challenges could be that if a foreign national, if a student actually has an approved H-1B petition, and they would still return back using their F-1 visa if they're coming back prior to October 1, sometimes the CBP might question their intent, because what happens is that F-1 is a strictly non-immigrant visa, right? Which means that you typically have to show that you have strong ties with your home country. At the end of your student program, you will return to your country, that you don't plan to immigrate to the United States. However, H-1B, on the other hand, is a dual intent visa, which means that while you're on H-1B status, you could technically pursue green card and permanent residency. So sometimes what happens is that if a student has an approved H-1B petition and they're coming back on their F-1 visa, on F-1 status for the remainder of the time, the CBP might say, hey, you're coming back on F-1, but you have an H-1B petition approved. Do you intend to continue staying in the United States? Or they might think that, they will no longer meet the requirement of non-immigrant intent. And there may be additional questions, which is why, again, it's very important to plan these well in advance, and make sure that you have adequate documentation and adequate responses available in case these questions get asked by the CBP.
That's great information, Mishita. So for everyone just tuning in, I'd like to remind you all that we are live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. This conversation is for informational purposes only and does not create an attorney-client relationship. So please comment your questions below if you're watching our live, or email us at info@chug.com and we'll be happy to help you out. So Mishita, let's get back to the conversation.
Of
So
course.
what's the typical wait time for a decision on an H-1B cap petition, and how does this waiting period influence F-1 students' travel plans?
Right, that's a great question. So typically, H-1B cap petitions could either be filed in regular processing, or they could be filed with the request for premium processing. Another piece that plays into this is that, unlike prior to 2020, when all the employers had to file the petition, during the first week of April, now there is a longer window. So after the H-1B registrations are notified, employers typically have up to 90 days to file the H-1B petitions. This may, or like, we don't really have data to back this up, but sometimes from what we've seen in terms of practice is that if you file the petitions later on, right, there may be more RFEs, just because they're trying to adjudicate a lot of petitions quickly. So if you file them earlier on, and if you file them in regular processing, you may get a response in about 4 or 5 months. But as we move closer to the filing window closing, when those 90 days start to close up, I think USCIS tends to get inundated, and then the processing times might increase. One way the employers can plan, to cut short this time is by opting to do premium processing. So if the H-1B cap petition is filed with premium processing, the USCIS has to give a response within 15 days. So if any student has, an urgent international travel and they need a response on the H-1B quickly so that they have their approval notice, maybe the employer and the student can talk about it and they can opt for filing it in premium processing. The other way of doing it is if the students have their travel, like if they know what their travel dates are, and if they fall within that 90-day window, maybe they can speak to their employer and say, hey, you know what, I have to make this quick trip. I'm going to go abroad and I will come back. After I come back, please file my H-1B petition so that while the petition is pending, I don't have to travel abroad and my automatic change of status does not get impacted. But like in any case, as long as anytime a student has to travel internationally, please make sure that you have a valid F-1 visa for your return, that you have an I-20, which is endorsed for travel, that you have informed your DSO so that your CVIS profile remains active. And if you're working, make sure that you have your OPT AD card with you and you get an employer's verification letter. So yeah, make sure that your documents and your ducks are always in order.
That's great to know that there's an option for premium processing if people do need to expedite the process a little bit and get a response quickly. So I appreciate you covering that, as well as, the typical wait time period and how, employers shouldn't be waiting 90 days to file because their chances of getting a response time later increases. So let's talk about what happens after the H-1B cap petition is approved. Great news. So can students on F-1 visa travel internationally after the H-1B cap petition is approved?
Right. So once the H-1B cap petition is approved, and if they were in the country while the petition was, filed and pending, that means that automatically on 1st of October, their status will change to H-1B so long as they continue to be in the US on 1st of October. So let's say you file your petition sometime end of April, and by 15th of May, you have the approval. Hooray. And now you have the summer and you want to travel. First, again, check with your employer if they're okay with that. Also make sure that your DSO is aware that you may have to travel abroad. So make sure that your I-20 is endorsed for travel. But now if you're traveling, the one thing that you want to bear in mind is, in addition to all of the documents that you have to have when traveling internationally on F-1, you have this other piece of puzzle, which is you have an approved H-1B petition. So as I was alluding to earlier, if you come back and the CBP looks at your documents, and they would obviously know by then that you have an H-1B petition approved, they might ask you questions about your intent. So you should have, an answer for that. You should be able to explain it. Additionally, please ensure that if you're traveling, that you are back in the country prior to 1st of October, because if you're still abroad on 10/1, then your change of status, that automatic change of status, will not happen. So let's say in the hypothetical that we just talked about, if your H-1B is approved on 15th of May and you decide to travel, you have to be back in the country by 30th of September. That's not to say that you should take a 4-month vacation. I'm sure that there are other considerations that you have to speak to, but my point being that you should be back in the country before October 1 so that your automatic change of status can go into effect.
That's great to know about when they have to be back on time in order for the change of status to go into effect. So let's say an F-1 student has a visa interview to renew their F-1 visa. What advice would you give to F-1 students with pending H-1B cap petitions who need to renew their F-1 visas while they're out of the country? And what kind of documents should they prepare to show that they intend to return to the US after their trip? We want to make sure that they know we're not going to stay in another country.
Right. No, that is tricky because if they are going to renew their F-1 visa while their H-1B petition is still pending, there is a chance that the consulate might think that, well, you're going to stay in the country, you're going to continue to be in the country, and you may not return back to your homeland. You probably don't have enough ties. You're showing your intention to immigrate, and that could be problematic. So one recommendation I would give is perhaps time the renewal such that you're able to get your F-1 stamp before your H-1B petition is filed, right? So instead of going after the H-1B petition is filed, try and go before, because otherwise it might get difficult to to convince the consulate that you still have intentions of continuing on F-1 status, that you will not immigrate. If you have a petition that's already pending, then perhaps another recommendation would be that instead of traveling abroad to get your F-1 visa renewed, maybe just continue to be in the country, let your H-1B after your H-1B is approved and your change of status has gone into effect, maybe you can travel abroad after that and return back on H-1B visa rather than on F-1 visa, right? So because at that time you would have your H-1B approval already, and it might be easier after October 1 to just get that stamp. It's a little tricky, and I would probably not recommend renewing the F-1 visa while the H-1B petition is pending.
That's helpful to know. So we can get our F-1 stamp before filing the H-1B petition, which will help the process a little bit from our end at least. So I appreciate you covering that and sharing your insights on that. So let's say it's unfortunately an H-1B cap petition is denied. So what happens to the status and work authorization of these students that are on these F-1 visas?
Right. So that's a great question. And, that's also something that ties into their work authorization on a different status, right, which is their F-1. Now, if they have their F-1 OPT, and that is valid for a particular duration, or their F-1 STEM EAD, which is also valid for a particular duration, if their H-1B is unfortunately denied, they can still continue working pursuant to their F-1 OPT EAD or F-1 STEM EAD, so long as they continue to meet, the status requirement for F-1. I think the trickier situation is for those people who have their work authorization extended pursuant to cap, because these are cases where their EADs or their OPT EADs or their STEM EADs may be expiring after maybe 1st of April, when you start filing, but prior to 30th September when the change of status takes into effect. So their work authorization was actually extended only because they had their H-1B cap petition pending. Now, if the EAD card expires after the cap denial has been received, then they can continue to work until the EAD expiration date. But if the EAD has already expired by the time the H-1B denial comes into effect, then essentially their work authorization may be in jeopardy, right? And if they do not have any other status into which they can change, then it's going to be difficult, and they may have to speak to either their employer or an immigration attorney to see what their options are.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. So if this does happen to you, and your petition is denied, make sure that you are speaking with an immigration attorney and your employer to find out what options you have, to see if we can still keep you to stay here. So what resources can F-1 students and their employers use to stay informed about changing travel restrictions and policies related to the H-1B cap petition process? Do you have any insight on this?
Right, that's a great question. So I think the university's DSOs, right, which are the designated student officers, they're international student officers, that is usually a great resource. And I always encourage F-1 students to inform any travel or any upcoming changes in employment, etc., to their TSOs, because they usually are a good resource. They usually keep up with the changing travel requirements or any other restrictions that may come up. Another good resource would be, obviously speaking to an immigration attorney, and reach out to any immigration attorney if you have questions about what are the changing travel requirements, restrictions, what happens if there are petitions pending, what happens when there are different statuses involved. I think people always have questions. What will happen to my F-1 if my H-1B is approved? What will happen to my H-1B if it's approved before or after 1st October, when I can travel, what I can travel. So always speak to an experienced immigration professional to get the correct answers. One thing I would definitely recommend not doing is, just Googling things on the internet and then coming up and saying, oh, this happened to a friend of mine, and so I can also do, because please remember that everyone's situation is different. And even though it may look that your friend and you are in a similar situation, immigration histories may be very, very different. So just because a friend is going somewhere or traveling somewhere or doing something, that alone should not be the reason for you to make that decision without knowing their background and so on and so forth. Because a lot of times we hear, oh, my friend decided to travel for a weekend, and so I decided to do the same, not knowing that they may not have any of the immigration restrictions that an F-1 student may have. So that's one thing I would recommend not doing. Additionally, the USCIS website and the Department of State's website are also good resources to continue looking at, to make sure that you're abreast of any changing requirements, both from the USCIS's perspective and the Department of State's travel advisory perspective.
Those are great insights, Mashita. So USCIS, the Department of State, are great resources. Also make sure, again, you're making informed decisions for your own sake. Every case is unique. So I appreciate you sharing that, Mashita. We do have time for one more question. So are there any exceptions or special circumstances that allow F-1 students to travel internationally during the pendency of their H-1B cap petition?
Right. So unfortunately, I don't think that there are any any unique situations or exceptions. I think the only thing that I would say is that if life happens and someone has to travel while their H-1B cap petition is pending, just make sure that you let your employer know well in advance, right? Or as well in advance as you possibly can. And then in that case, it may be possible that you may have to stay abroad for a little bit, right? If your work authorization for any reason does not continue on F-1 for any reason, and maybe you have to stay abroad until the H-1B goes into effect on 1st of October, and maybe you have to then get an H-1B visa stamp and then return. So always be, in communication, and sometimes prepare for the fact that you may have to be abroad for a little bit longer than you planned for. Because a lot of times what happens is that people think that they will, make a quick trip and come back, and things may happen, right? As a result of which maybe the entry is denied or something else may happen. So just always prepare for the fact that you may have to stay a bit longer. And the other thing I would say is, it's never the end of the world, because there would always be some sort of a solution. The employer and a experienced immigration professional, once you discuss with them, maybe there would be a solution that we did not think of immediately as a student themselves, right? Because maybe they were just looking to travel. So in which case I would say that if it does happen, and if for any reason either your change of status is the automatic change of status does not happen, and if you have to go for consular processing of the H-1B, there could be options for that, and then you can wait it out until 1st of October of that year, and then return on H-1B visa stamp. Or if you can discuss this with your employer ahead of time, maybe ask them to file the petition after your return, so that you don't have to make this trip again. So like I said, always be in communication with these stakeholders, so that your decision is an informed one, And in those cases, if you still have to travel, well, you have to travel, and then maybe a solution will be worked out based on your situation.
Thank you so much for your insights, Mishita. I truly appreciate you taking your valuable time and spending it with us to answer these questions. And again, if you guys are watching this and need any help with your H-1B process, becoming an F-1 student, Mishita and our whole team of attorneys are available for you. So please reach out to us anytime. If you have any questions for Mishita or our team, please email us at info@choop.com. And this does bring us to the end of our conversation. So thank you all for joining us today. To stay up to date to news, please subscribe to our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube channel. And if this video was helpful, please make sure to give it a like. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to email us at info@choop.com and join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care.